hosted by Lifetime Adoption. My name is Kim King, and Libby Murray is also here with me, and we have a special guest this evening. If you're new to Lifetime and you want to get in touch with us, you're welcome to call the office at 1-800-923-6784 with any questions that you have. Of course, if you're already a Lifetime family, then you'll know which coordinator you're already assigned to speak and email directly with your coordinator. We encourage you to join us on Facebook so you can stay in the loop on a regular basis with all the goings-on behind the scenes here at Lifetime. That's facebook.com/open.adoption. If it's your first time joining us on a webinar tonight, welcome. And if you're already a Lifetime family or have joined us for many webinars before, we appreciate you being in touch with us and participating tonight. And hopefully this will be a great interactive webinar where you can participate by typing in your comments and questions if you are joining us online in the webinar format. If you've never filled out an application with Lifetime and you're not sure what step to take, I would say the application is a great first step, and you can reach the application directly online at lifetimeadoption.com/apply. So it shouldn't be too hard to find the application just by navigating through on lifetimeadoption.com, but if you add in the /apply, it'll take you right to the start page. And our application is very simple, very straightforward. It shouldn't take you maybe 20 or 30 minutes to fill it out. And if you end up having any questions, please reach out by phone or email, and we'll be happy to help you. My email is kim@lifetimeadoption.com. So Libby, thanks for preparing our webinar tonight.
I'm very excited about our guest, and I know that he's had on his heart to share with us his experience and his perspectives through 2 open adoptions. I'm sorry, I have a little frog in my throat tonight, covering from a cough, but I hope it holds out for us tonight. I'm so excited to see all of you here tonight, and again, I want to encourage your participation. If you have questions or comments while Jake is sharing his story tonight, please chime in. Or, you know, if there's a question that someone else asks that you have experience about, feel free to type in what worked for you, because we can always kind of bounce that around too. And excuse me. I think what's neat about tonight's guest too is that adoptive dad Jake, he adopted twice through Lifetime with his wife Tanya, and Tanya recently shared her story of Lifetime adoptions in a webinar in August. And if you go to adoptionteleconference.com, you can actually hear her side. But tonight we get Jake's side, and I think it's going to be a really fresh look at open adoption and learning, you know, how to embrace open adoption in your family over time, because now they've been living with this for quite a few years. So, Jake, I'm just glad that you're here tonight. Thank you for joining us.
Well, you're welcome. Absolutely, anytime.
We have a mixed group of families here tonight. We have people who are just thinking about adoption, to people who are getting all the early phases done, all the way to people who are ready and waiting, or they may even be matched with their child's birth parent. So I want to start maybe backing up a while to the very beginning when you and Tanya decided to adopt in general. What led you guys to adoption in the first place?
Well, we had about a 3 or 4 year, I say, bout with infertility, where you know, we were like anyone else. We were going through, you know, all the different channels of infertility and not being able to get pregnant, and that whole emotional swing. We did several steps of that, and it got to the point where it could happen through IVF. However, the cost was about the same as adoption, and we felt like, you know, came to the decision together as a couple that the Lord's decision for us was to take the step, help out another family, bring another family in, and head down the path of adoption.
So had you, at that point, considered all the different types of adoption, or did you immediately know about open adoption? How did you go from, okay, we think we're called to adopt, to what type of adoption you wanted to make happen?
I think we did quite a bit of research between different agencies, and it was never, for us, it was never really an open or closed. It was, when we first came in, it was all just about, we wanted to adopt. Now, how do you do that? And so we started going through the research, and I have to say this was mostly on my wife. She did a ton of the research on it, and she was really the go-getter here. Found Lifetime and had talked to, I think, a couple other birth mothers, or adoptive mothers, that had gone through Lifetime and reached out to you guys. And I was still pretty on the I don't say on the fence, but just unsure and kind of on the back burner of it. And she was really the instigator that. And then when we had our first call with Lifetime, that's kind of where you guys started asking us the difficult questions of how open and all the different decisions that we had to make and those things. And so that really brought us together and started that talk with us about what did we really want. And
right.
the more we started, kept talking about it and kept praying about it and going down that road, it opened our eyes to the fact of how we could, not only impact children, not only be able to have children in our home that we could raise, but it also gave us the ability to embrace and bring in another family and not only help the kids, but help someone else that may or may not have the means, whatever their situation is, for whatever reason they're putting a child up for adoption. Doesn't always mean that they don't want to have any contact, or doesn't always mean that they don't want to be involved in some aspect. And every situation is different, but we came to that realization that whatever was there for a birth mother or birth father or whatever, birth grandparents in our situation, whatever that looked like, we were willing to go reach out and seek out what that was, and then go down that path making the best decisions that we could. And that was really, really uncomfortable for me because I'm a planner, and I like to know what's going on. I like to do the research. I like to understand. But going down that path, there was definitely a lot of prayers and a lot of uncertainty and stuff. But the fact that we had each other and we'd done our research and we could step back, talk about things, and plow forward, that's the only way you can really do it sometimes.
I'm glad you brought that up. I wrote down the question, how did you manage the unknowns in adoption planning? Because in particular, I think that's a struggle that both husband and wife, when it's an adoptive couple, that they both face that. But I know that it's handled a little differently. And like you were saying, that Tanya she drove most of it forward, getting the research, setting up the calls, making the steps happen. But you were partnered with her in this. It was just that she kind of took the lead in making the initial steps happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So, she was the driver.
But like you were saying, initially you were just kind of like, okay, well, let's.
I think it.
Where that goes. Really, was there ever a concern that you had about the unknowns? I hear from a lot of adoptive dads in particular that they get concerned about how do we know the health of the child? How do we know when this is going to happen? How long? How much? How many?
The way that I kind of approached that was from the standpoint that regardless of what your situation is, regardless of where you're going, regardless of what you're doing, you can look, 5 feet or 10 feet out in front of you every day when you're walking. You don't look under your feet and, just to make sure where you're stepping right now. You can look out there a ways, but you also don't look out there, a mile down the road to see what's coming. And regardless of if we were, having children naturally or regardless of if we were having, if we were adopting, we can't foresee what's going to happen down the road. The only thing we can do is put faith in the Lord and, do the best that we can and, let Him lead us down that path. And, my strength, drew from Him, but also from the fact that we could step back, we could take that step back together and say a prayer and make the best decision that we can and move forward, and you can only look so far out.
Right. I think that's really good advice for probably to apply to a lot of different circumstances, but especially when it comes to adoption, that anxiety can control you, or you can look at it and say, okay, but what's right in front of us?
Exactly. I mean, you can make the decision for tomorrow, maybe what's going to happen, but, realistically, you can make the decision for what you're going to do for dinner.
Right. And so I know for you and your family, even before your first adoption with Connor, that you and I were just talking moments ago about how it was important to you and Tanya that you were completely ready to adopt before you started being officially active and looking for a birth mother to choose you. So because what I like about both of your stories is that a lot of times we hear more about people who wait and wait and wait for this to happen, but that you guys actually are a great example of why you should be ready, because you don't know when it's going to happen, and it actually went pretty fast for you guys twice. And so how did you guys just navigate those steps? Like, the home study can be kind of tedious and uncomfortable. How did you digest those things to just get ready? How did you keep putting one foot in front of the other?
Well, I think, again, this falls back on Tanya for sure, but, she from the very beginning had a vision of what, and how far out we didn't know, what the timing was going to be, we didn't know, what things to expect, we didn't know, but she had a vision of what the end goal was going to be, and, so from the beginning she started, we had an extra bedroom in our house, so she built the nursery and was continually working on that. We started doing, following the advice of you guys at Lifetime, and, the steps that we needed to take, and started with the down payment, did our initial contract and application, and started that process. And then we are pretty rural here, and so getting a home study here was kind of difficult. They actually came from about 450 miles away or so to do our home study, and he had to come a few times, if I remember right, for the first one. And so
Tanya,
it was,
you're asking in the background there?
No, nobody else is here. I'm just thinking.
Oh, okay.
Thinking out, trying to remember. But
yeah, it was a while ago.
So 6, 7 years now, almost. So anyway, he came out, and came out a few times, and that was a pretty long process. But one thing we agreed on going into it was, we had a lot of things that we could work on, and that, for me, gave me something to do. It gave me somewhere to direct my energy. And so, working on the marketing pieces and the videos and the home study and all of these steps that we needed to do, the nursery, not knowing what the timing was going to be, we wanted to kind of have everything ready before we went, quote unquote, went live with you guys, because we didn't know what it was going to be. We understood that the timing could be fast, it could be long, we didn't know. But the bottom line is we wanted to have everything possible we could have done, so that if it happened quickly, we were ready for it to happen quickly. If it took a while, that was in the Lord's hands. That's not anything we could control. And then we got the call. We went live on, I think, a Sunday. You guys probably have the records, but I think we went live on Sunday, and a week, 10 days later, we got a call that birth mom was in labor, and we've been selected. And, Tanya had to make the call to talk to the birth mother, and she was 5 hours away, and we piled in the car, and we were home, the following Saturday with a brand new baby boy.
Wow. So, and what I love, how this came back to memory was because just this week we posted on Facebook a tip about making sure you keep your home study updated, because it can really compromise an adoption and makes birth mothers question, how ready are you? Do you actually have intentions to adopt my child, or are you just sort of toying with it? And you posted a comment in that thread, and then you and I were even talking about it later. So I would love if you would just share sort of generally how it was that you and Tanya got called last minute, because I think that it's a great reminder, and again, a really awesome reason to be ready.
Absolutely. It actually was, and I don't remember if it was brought up when in the initial phone call, or if it was, when we were talking to Karen, Connor's birth mom, and his birth father at the hospital. But it ended up being that they had been previously matched for 2 months with another family, and she went into labor 3 weeks early, and their home study wasn't completed yet. And so, and when she matched, then we weren't live at that point, so she never saw our, any of our profile. And I think this just kind of is also a testament to how the Lord works in, crazy ways. But so when she and Connor's birth dad were at the hospital going into labor, they had to match with another family, and so they called you guys, and you were reading profiles. Well, Connor's birth mom is very into horses, and Connor's birth dad is very into baseball, softball, those types, very active person. So in our profile, Tanya is very into horses, and I have played baseball, softball, for the last 15 years. So those were very heavy in our profile, which, from what they said, we were the first one that you guys read. And they were like, yeah, we've decided. And they didn't even listen to the other two that they had to hear because they were done. And so it was, it just, the match couldn't have been better in that aspect. And it just, now looking back on it with how close, Connor's birth father was here maybe 4 weeks ago, and he stayed overnight with us and went to a football game with us and stuff in town. And then we have quite a bit of contact with his birth mom, and his birth grandparents even come out here a couple times a year to visit us.
Oh, wow. So one of the things that I did kind of preview, some people may have seen in their email, was the story you had shared with me a couple months ago when we began setting up this possible webinar, which was the story of when you first met Connor's birth father, or you first met him after you had adopted.
Right.
And you shared the story at the park. And so I didn't realize that you were still having visits with him, or that had happened recently, so that's really cool to hear. What is that? I would love for you to tell that story in just a minute, but
sure.
Looking at how you just recently had this visit, and then where you were, say, 6-7 years ago, or maybe even on the other side of that 7 years ago, of what would it even be like to have another family attached to our children and involved in our lives. How has that perspective changed for you? Like, what do you tell people when they ask you what open adoption is?
Oh, open adoption is like the best thing for me, and it's, I was very, very skeptical coming in as far as, what a child would look like, or how they would see me or as their father. And, Connor's well aware that he's adopted at 6. He's well aware of his birth mom's name, and he knows who she is when she comes, and his birth grandparents, and they've embraced everything. But from the beginning, I was very skeptical of it, and didn't know what that would look like. But again, it's just, not being able to have that forethought to look out at how things change, how things grow, and just embracing the support for the kids. And I think I can't stress that enough, that it's more about the support for the kids. And in doing that, the birth families get to have contact. But it's not, I'm in a position where I have the ability to, my wife and I should say, that we have the ability to control, and if things didn't go well, or if people didn't respect us and our decisions, or they were hurting the children emotionally, or however, we have the ability to make that stop. But as long as everything's good, kids can't have enough support. And I mean, you see a single mother or a single father with 3 kids at the park, and my heart just breaks for them, because I know how difficult it is for me, and I know how difficult it is for my wife, and we're together, and we've got two beautiful children. But at the end of the day, the kids can have, they need as much support as they possibly can to be raised in today's society. And whether or not it's a birth mother or a birth father or it's me or it's a birth grandparent or they're, what kid doesn't want 6 grandparents?
I think I have a photo of, let's see, there's this one I think is of Connor's, because his birth mother was actually adopted as well, right?
Yeah,
so she has a birth family and an adopted family.
Correct. The upper right one is Connor's birth grandparents that adopted his birth mom. And the lower left one is Connor's birth mom, and he's on her lap, and then that's her birth parent. And they live, across the country from us, but they were out here visiting, I want to say last summer, like a year ago. And she requested, and we drove halfway across the state and met him for breakfast and went to the park so that they could get to meet him and meet us and, understand the relationship, because it's very rare. And, it was a Catholic closed adoption that they were involved in. And so when she was giving Connor up for adoption, they were very skeptical as to what the process would look like. And because how times change, that's how everything was done back then. And so, there's a rift kind of between her families that, one took the other, and, this drama that we just completely stay out of. But we've embraced as many parents and as much family as want to be around the kids, because at the end of the day, it's about the kids growing up with the support that they need.
So we had a good question come in here while you're talking about this. When you get together with these birth grandparents or with your children's birth mothers, what do Connor and Cassidy call them? Do they have nicknames for them? Do they just call them by name?
They call, Karen and Kayla, they call by their first name. So, as if they were a friend or whatever. That's, both birth moms. And so they're just, by their first name. The grandparents, and it's pretty much only been Connor because of Cassidy's been too young to talk till recently, but he's always called them Grandma. Grandma Karina and Papa Mark, it's just, it's a natural evolution. But then we have a lot of great cousins, great grand-cousins and family. And, my coworker was 65 years old, and he called him Papa Tim. So, in that aspect, we've kind of stretched it to be that age range is a grandma or a papa. So it's not necessarily associated with birth as much as, he knows the people that are around him. He knows who his family is. He knows who's there for him. But what he calls them is really associated with their age.
Right, because he's a little kid. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But he knows who, like, for example, your parents are, or who Tanya's parents are. And children can grasp the relationships between extended family at a very young age.
And he understands who Karen's adoptive parents are also. He understands that they're her parents, and whether or not, he understood who her birth parents were, I can't remember. Because he was, he would have been 5, but I just don't remember what that looked like. I know he called them Grandma and Papa, but I don't remember what his relationship was in his mind with who they were.
That's such a good thing. And so then we had another question come in, and I was also going to ask you to briefly describe, because like you said, Connor's fully aware that he was adopted. I'm sure that he doesn't know every tiny detail, like you said. He's a little kid. So did you wait until a certain point to have that discussion with him, or is this just something you as parents talk about with your kids from the day you brought them home?
We've really talked about it from the beginning, but, it was a funny story. We were sitting around the table, and Karen was here for, I think, his I want to say it was his 4th birthday. And, Tanya and Karen had come to the decision and, that they were going to tell him that Karen was his birth mom and so they're all sitting around the table and Tanya says, Connor, do you know who Karen is? And he's like, yeah, she's my friend. And and she goes, no, do you know, Karen grew you for us in her belly. And he stopped and he looked at her and he goes, I grew in your belly? And she goes, yeah, I grew you for Jake and Tanya. Wasn't that nice? And he goes, yeah, can you pass me the yellow and the green? So there's color. And it was just like, that was it. And ever since then, he's talked about Karen, Karen being his belly mama and Kayla being Cassidy's belly mama.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's been the way that it is. And, it was something that we were very worked up about, and it was something that they were concerned about how he was going to take it. And I think it's just a testament to the sooner the kids know, and, especially in our situation, I mean, we've never hidden it from them. It can never be a situation down the road where it creates friction between them and us. I mean, we want to be there for them to support them all the way through, just like we want their birth families to be there to support them all the way through, as long as they're supportive. And, there should be nothing hidden in my view. I mean, it is what it is, and whether we choose to accept it or not.
Mm-hmm. Right, that's such a good point. So now that he is, getting old enough to start having his own little friends and his, his own kind of hobbies and interests and things, I mean, do you find him talking to other people about his adoption story? Do you think he's, kind of getting
I don't think he, and I don't fully know when he's at school, but I know that his friends know, the ones that are closest to him, because I've heard him say, that he was adopted and it's different, but it's never a negative at all. And I think that that's where times are changing, in the fact that it's always been kind of a secretive thing. And I've talked about when we were going through the adoption process and adopting and stuff, I was in a sales role where I was in contact with a lot of people, and that became my mechanism to deal with it, is just talk about it. Because if I talk about it, then there's nothing hidden, and then there's nothing that I can feel bad about, because everybody's supporting you. And so the more support you have around you, the more you talk about it, nobody's going to beat you down for adopting. So it's, the more I talked about it, the more I found out how many people were adopted. And it was always something that nobody ever knew. But the more I talked about it, the more I brought it out of people, and not in my age and, above, up to probably in their 40s and 50s, I started finding out all these people that were adopted, and it was just fantastic. And so it brought it all out. And so, I mean, the moral of the story is it's out there, and there's a lot of it out there, and, there's a lot of support. But if he doesn't talk about it, how's he ever going to know? So we embrace them to talk about it. We embrace them to, be who they are, believe in who they are, and we'll support them all the way through.
Right. And I would love for you, because I think what I'm seeing more and more with open adoption is that now it's not just birth mothers, but that, like you were saying, sometimes there are birth fathers involved in the story. And that I think in particular, I think it can be very special for a birth father to even know that he could have part in that open adoption and then even get that validation from the adoptive dad, because I see a lot of times sort of, even if it's not spoken about or real in depth, I see a connection happening there often. So what was it like for you? Because Connor's adoption, I know we're focusing a lot on him right now, but that's because you have the most involvement with his family.
For sure.
But, his adoption went so fast, but you knew initially that it was his birth mother and birth father that were choosing adoption for him at birth. how long did it take to really develop a relationship with that man?
For me, it was pretty instant. And he wasn't with Connor's birth mom at that time. They were at the hospital together, but they weren't together as a relationship. And when we got there, Connor was 2.5 hours old maybe when we got to the hospital, and his birth father met us outside. And my parents were already there because they lived closer, so they'd already met everybody. And but when we went in, they we obviously went and met Connor and stuff, and then his birth father introduced himself, and we had some discussion with all of the family in the room and friends and stuff, and they were asking us some questions, and it was an emotional time for me, for Tanya, for birth mom, for everybody. But it was nice and refreshing to get to know them and to see the joy on my wife's face, and then also to stand back and see the joy on Connor's birth mom's face. And I mean, there was pain there also, but you could see that she was accepting the fact that while it was difficult, it was right. And so then the birth father and I went out in the hall and visited, and talked about his past and what he'd done and why they selected us, and talked about playing softball and all the things that we had in common. And I mean, we hit it off immediately. Exchanged phone numbers and all of this, and so as we're kind of going through the adoption process, we get home, and there was a little hiccup with it was Labor Day weekend, and so we couldn't go file the paperwork at court until Tuesday. And Connor's birth mom called the court and said she wasn't sure, which immediately all the paperwork she'd signed, that just threw it all out the window. And then she just never followed up on that phone call. So we ended up having to go through all these additional steps and uncertainty, and getting some kind of rights to where we could, if there was a problem, we could at least take them to the hospital, and temporary guardianship, and all of this uncertainty and freaking out and all that. And finally, we're getting to the place where we're ready to terminate parental rights on their side so that we can, move forward with the adoption. And I get a phone call from Connor's birth father that says, I'm not 100% sure that he's mine, so I would like to have a paternity test. And, my thought process is like, are you freaking kidding me? Because, here we are at the last step, and now he's saying, and so, I went down a road of sales questioning with him of, who else could it be, why would you want, do you want to change the situation to where we are now?
Right.
And he said no. And I said, so, who else could he be? And, he had a name, and it was a Hispanic gentleman. And I said, well, you realize that Connor's blonde hair and blue eyes, right? And he said, well, yeah, but, my dad is willing to pay for it, and I just want to be 100% sure. And I said, so would that change anything? And he said, no. And I said, well, if it doesn't change anything, then, and you're certain that Connor's in the best place that he can be, then it does nothing but hurt the situation. And, we had about a 45-minute conversation all revolving around this and probing questions, and finally he came to the realization that that the best thing that he could possibly do at this point is take a step back, which is what he did, thankfully, and we just proceeded down the road of terminating parental rights, and we were done. But, I go back to that moment as, I've been a salesperson for, all different products, all different stuff for the past 20 years, and that's the biggest sales job I've ever had. It's going down the road with him that it wasn't necessary. And
do you think that he maybe was asking that? Because I know that that's sometimes a concern. We get a lot of questions about what about what about the child's father, and what if he isn't sure he wants to do the adoption? And do you think that, because in my experience, sometimes that question can come out of a birth father because maybe his family is pressuring him, like, why are you taking responsibility for this child? Like, are you even sure this child is yours? Like, like there's a lot of pressure coming from that side, even though in his mind he's thinking, what, this is moving forward. I mean, it's practically done, but it's like he almost had to appease other people.
There's no question about that, that he was definitely doing it because he was probed by his father to do it. And I think just to make sure, it was probably his father's peace of mind that, that they were doing what was right for Ryan's child. And we ended up not doing anything there, but that next summer, so Connor was almost 1, I want to say like June, so it would have been like he was 10 months old. They asked if they could come out. Ryan, his mother, and his father, and come out and meet Connor. And we're like, absolutely. And we just came out, and they were here an hour and a half. They drove 4 hours one way, and they were here an hour and a half, met him for lunch, played in the park with him for 45 minutes, and they left. And that, in my mind, was the paternity test. Because they were wanting to be 100% certain that that was Ryan's child, and there's no doubt about it. Are you there?
Okay. Jake, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
I'm so sorry about that. It looks like our phone system just blipped out for a second, so I just dialed in on my cell phone. That's why when it says who's talking, it's phone caller. It's me, Kim King. I'm
no
sorry,
problem.
Jake. So, you were just talking about how there was a question of a paternity test and how it was really, the root of it was his father, probing into it and everything, and you had, worked out the details that, he...
Oh, yeah, they ended up all coming out here, and Connor's birth father, Ryan's parents all came, drove 4 hours one way for a 45-minute to an hour lunch, and I think that was just for that paternity test, since they didn't do it, so that they could meet him and see for certain that he was, that he looked like Ryan or whatever that case may be, and they're like two peas in a pod, so there's really no doubt about it.
Uh-huh. So how long had you had Connor with you when you got that phone call from his birth father? Is that,
I would say probably a month and a half, maybe.
Wow. Yeah. So it did delay the process.
Well, the phone call didn't. The phone call
from the birth mom.
Didn't.
The phone call from the birth mom, right? Had delayed, and then.
Oh yeah, she called the court. So she never called us. She just called the court and left a voicemail over Labor Day weekend that she didn't want him to process the paperwork. And then, once she leaves that voicemail in Washington, she had 48 hours, I think, to follow it up with, a written statement saying, that she wanted, him back. And she never did that.
Yeah.
It was just a question in her mind, that she's apologized to us since then, and she's, become. It was just her going through her emotional state and not 100% sure what she wanted.
Right.
As difficult as that is.
But she never reached out to you directly at that time, so you just kept following the path that was in front of you and taking the proper legal channels, and she never said anything.
Correct. She never followed through with it.
So you felt confident that this was what she wanted.
Correct. And then, at Christmas, we got a present for him from her, and then, we had, at that time, through that time we were having maybe one or two phone calls from her adoptive parents, so that we were kind of talking with them on their side, but she was being removed from them. So they didn't really know everything, but they had the channel to her. So we were all still kind of building the trust between all of us, but at the same time it wasn't directly to her.
Mm-hmm. Now, Libby had mentioned that you had you'd shared with us about a conversation you'd had with Connor's birth father, and that he'd given Connor something that was very special to him. Can you just take us back to that day and tell
Absolutely.
us all how that all
Yeah,
went?
it actually was the day that we saw the picture when we met Karen's birth family, because Ryan, Connor's birth father, lives in the same town that we met them in. And so I reached out to him, via text, and I just texted him and said, hey, we're going to be there for, at the park for, a few hours in the afternoon. Are you available? And would you be available to swing by? And, you could see Connor and Karen and everybody. And he said, well, I have to work. I'll see if I can get off a little bit early. And then he called me. And I was like, whoa, he's calling. And so, we talked for a little bit and asked how Connor was doing and all that. And I said, yeah, he's doing fantastic. And, he's a little athlete and blah, blah, blah. And he said, well, he goes, my dad passed away. And I said, yeah, I was sorry to hear that. And, we talked about that previously. But he said, when I was out back east cleaning out his loft, I found my old baseball glove, and it was a baseball glove that my dad had used when he was in Little League. I used when I was in Little League, and I would like to give that to Connor if that's okay with you. And I said, absolutely. I said, that's no problem at all. I'd love for you to do it, and I'd love for Connor to be able to have that. And so we basically, he came to the park. We'd had, breakfast and played with Karen's birth family for quite a while, and then Ryan showed up and after work, and we visited with him for probably an hour and a half or so, and then he, asked Connor to go with him and me, and we walked over to the car, and he got the glove out, and he kneeled down beside him, and and explained to him, that this was his dad's, and that he played Little League with it, and he wanted Connor to be able to play Little League with it too, and Connor was like, that's so awesome. And then he just put it on and he took off running, And I mean, it was just like, it was such a big deal to both of us, again, but he's 5 years old, and it's something that, I will cherish forever because it was a moment that I will never, ever forget. And it's a moment that meant so much to Ryan, and it was something that Connor will have, but he won't really fully appreciate until he gets older. But it's something that he will always have that's a connection to his past. And, and that would have never happened had we not been open and had I not had a relationship with Ryan, because that wouldn't have happened through Tanya. That wouldn't have happened through anybody else because, Ryan, to be honest, doesn't reach out very often. I text him if I'm thinking about him, I'll say, hey, how you doing, or whatever, just to keep that line of communication open. And then it usually starts a 15 or 20-minute text back and forth about how things are going, and and then that's it. And it's really easy to do.
I was just thinking as you said that, Jake. A lot of couples that I've worked with through Lifetime, a lot of times I think the adoptive father, I don't think he means to come off this way, but he just sort of assumes, well, any open adoption will be maintained by my wife, and that he kind of just wants to roll into, I'm the dad, and I just kind of take care of my family and do my thing. But I loved what you just said, that moment probably would not have happened if you hadn't had a relationship personally, because maybe he wouldn't have been as comfortable, who knows, but just what would you tell other men who feel like, well, open adoption's all fine if my wife, if that's what my wife wants and that's how we have to adopt, but I'm not sure that I need to be that involved. I mean, what would you tell a man who has hesitations about
how important his role is in participating in the open adoption.
I would tell any other father that this is something that can impact you past any ways that you possibly could think. And it's a way that, and it's something that can impact your child, and it can impact you, and it can impact another male that is involved in your child's life. And it's something that you can create a relationship between his birth father, the child, and you, and create a triangular relationship that you will never, ever understand that bond. And the relationship that I have with Ryan is just, you know, it maybe is a monthly text, or maybe is a every 3-month text. It's not huge, but it's something that I feel like every time I text him, it makes me feel good that I'm continuing that bond, and I'm doing it for my son. Because it's something that Ryan will be here to watch him play high school baseball. There's no doubt in my mind. If I keep a relationship, he will come and be involved and support him through those steps as we're traveling, as we're doing those things. He will do it, but it's not going to happen from him to me. It's going to have to be maintained on my side. And I look at it as him being a good friend of mine. I mean, that's what he is. That's how I treat him, is like I would any other good friend that lives, you know, 2.5 hours away.
Right, that's a really good, I often like to compare open adoption to extended family, or the love you can feel for a good friendship or even a close neighbor, you know, that it doesn't, just like any family relationship, it doesn't even have to be something that's constant. It's just, it's there, it's available and open, and when you catch up with each other, it's not like you have to backtrack and recreate a relationship. It's that you just keep going.
Exactly.
And I love hearing that. And I think, I hope, I don't know how far you got while my phone got disconnected. But in contrast, your daughter's adoption, you have an open adoption, but the connection with her birth family is very different. But you made a comment to me before the webinar began that I think could kind of take us into Cassidy's, what that experience is like in contrast, because you were talking about how, again, just like you just said just now, your efforts, yours and your wife's efforts to stay in touch with these birth parents has really blessed and blossomed the possibilities for the open adoption. So it wasn't necessarily something you were just waiting for them on, because I think a lot of adoptive parents assume, well, I'm a responder in open adoption. I'm not necessarily an initiator. And what you guys are modeling here is that more that it's you wanted to say, we're available and open for this, and we'll keep our commitment to what you asked for, and you know, whenever you're ready to respond and engage back, that's up to you. So really, you guys are making the effort and just putting it out there rather than waiting for it. And so I know that you were saying that Tanya actually has more of a relationship with Cassidy's birth mother just because of the connection that they made during that match time before she was born.
Correct.
And so what is that like for you guys now?
Well, just, you know, a little bit on that one is that we matched for, I think, 10 weeks maybe before Cassidy was born with her family, and that was a plane trip, you know, halfway across the country to adopt Cassidy. And so because we had Connor at home, and you know, we had, you know, child care, and you know, grandma was coming and all of that, we made a decision to fly Tanya out there about 2.5 weeks early before Kayla was due, so that she could be there when Cassidy was born, and because it was something that we both really wanted to be, you know, in the delivery room and be able to experience that. But it was more important for Tanya to make that connection with Cassidy's birth mom prior. So that's why we made the decision for her to go out there by herself. And they had, you know, several conversations, you know, through dinners and stuff, and where they got to really get to know each other. And so Kayla ended up, she was, when she went into labor, it was about midnight. And she actually called Tanya at her hotel and asked her to take her to the hospital because her husband didn't want to get up. And so Tanya hops in the car, goes over, picks her up at her apartment, and drives her to the hospital. And Cassidy ended up being born, I think, about 11 o'clock that next morning, and I was en route when she was born. But, yeah, so I mean, that they definitely created a bond that time prior to her being born that is something that I won't be able to recreate, but we also don't know Cassidy's birth father. And so that kind of I take a back seat a little bit to that relationship because, you know, it's something that they have. It's like any other of her girlfriends that I don't always necessarily want to know what if they're always talking about, to be honest. And, you know, they can do what they're going to do, but I have absolutely no doubt in my mind that what Tanya is doing is what's good for Cassidy. There's no doubt in my mind. And if anything big came up, you know, it's something we would talk about. But another story I'd like to share about that is after we were all released from the hospital and we were still at our hotel room. It was probably she was probably 2 days old or 3 days old maybe, and we're all sitting around in the hotel room and Kayla's holding Cassidy and she looks up at Tanya and she signs the papers and at this point she's verbally, but she had to wait until the next day to sign with the social worker to give her away, you know, to give her up. And so it was still in that waiting period. And Kayla looks up at Tanya and she says, I don't know how you guys would feel, but I would really like to have Cassidy in my apartment and have her one night. And here we are, you know, back in Ohio, and we're both in the hotel room with our brand new baby, and here's her birth mom saying, you know, I don't want to raise this child, but I want to have her in my apartment one night so that I can, you know, be with her. And, you know, Tanya's initial reaction was, well, we'll talk about it. And Kayla looked at her like dumbfoundedly and said, what do you mean you'll talk about it? And it was at that point where I'm kind of a periphery in the room, and so I was getting a drink or something like that, and I was overhearing, but I was like, you know, evaluating the situation. I'm trying to, you know, this was in no way had any forethought of this happening. You know, it's like an on-the-fly decision, and we're like dumbfounded and taken back and everything, and based on her response to Tanya's question, or to her, you know, we'll talk about it, you know, I was standing back thinking, well, this can't be good, this can't be good, what are we going to do, what are we going to do? And, you know, it just came to me to look at her, be supportive of her, and trust her. And we had to come to the decision, and it was in a 30-second time span where Tanya and I made eye contact across the room, and I nodded, and she said, okay, that's what you want, then, you know, we're fine with that. But it was something that we still made a decision together, and I will never, ever change my feeling on that situation is that she was testing us, and she was testing our relationship with each other, and she was testing our relationship and how much we trusted her. And when she made that decision, and had we said no, she was taking her that night regardless. There's no doubt in my mind that she was taking her back to her apartment that night regardless of what we said, but she gave us the ability to come to that decision ourselves. And had we said no, we probably wouldn't have adopted her.
Right, because in those moments you were kind of at her mercy, and even though the connection was really good, like you said, I love that you brought up the trust, because I feel most importantly what open adoption offers is a trust to build, and that it's hard. You know, it's hard to take any relationship to that next level of, okay, well, we really like you, but do we trust you? And knowing, like you said, that it probably could have made or break broken your adoption story right there. And it's not to say that if she had changed her mind because, for whatever reason, there's a million ways that, or maybe not a million, but a few ways that story could have gone. But the only way to find out if that daughter was going to come home to you permanently was to give that trust an opportunity to come back.
Right. And my perspective on it in that moment was, we've trusted her for 9 months to raise a child the way that she said she was going to raise a child, or to grow the child the way that she said she was going to do it, without drugs, without smoking, without all these things. And we've trusted her that far. What's one more night? And neither one of us slept that night. I mean, it was terrible. And, we're just, totally, at her mercy at that point. But the next morning when we went over to pick her up, they had breakfast ready. We had orange juice and eggs and all this stuff for breakfast and at their apartment. And it was like a family. And it was, and it was like, had that gone so differently, it would have never, that would have never happened. And, it was like that, there's no doubt in my mind that was the step. And, you have to trust. As difficult as that is, you have to trust.
Right. Well, we keep getting all these wonderful comments coming in, Jake, about how remarkable your faith is and your heart for your children, and just what a remarkable man you are to just speak up for the birth families in this way. And I know how inspiring you are in your words tonight for everyone who's listening, and the insights that you've brought to the forefront through both of your stories, I think are priceless, because every adoption is so unique. But I know when you and I spoke a while ago, I know the passion behind your heart for wanting people to just understand that it's possible, and it can be really great.
Absolutely.
Is there? You've given us so much tonight. Is there anything?
I knew this hour wasn't going to be long enough.
And it was funny because I wrote down some questions as you were talking, and then you went and had answered them yourself. And because I love that you brought up, because so often we get to hear from the adopted mothers, and they talk about how amazing it is to finally see their husband as the dad that they always dreamed of parenting with, and you even brought that in about that it just solidified your willingness to move forward with open adoption just by seeing the joy in Tanya's face in becoming a mother and feeling at peace about the relationships that were created with each of your children's birth parents. And I'm just so grateful for your perspective tonight and your viewpoints and your tips. And we had a lot of people saying, "Oh my gosh, she handled that so well."
Well, it's all about faith. It's all about the trust between you and your spouse. It's all about the love that you have between each other, and it's all about expanding that love with the birth family. That's what it comes down to. It comes down to God is the top, your triangle with your spouse, and then expanding that out with your birth family. I can't stress that enough. That's what it's built on.
That's so true. And do you have anything left that you feel like I really wanted to make sure I got to talk about this tonight, or that the audience got to hear this tip or anything? Is there anything?
I don't. I could go on and on all different aspects of it, but I think that the big message for me is to prospective adoptive fathers out there is that it's okay. It's okay for you to feel that way, and you just have to trust, because it wasn't easy for me. It was a lot of days that I was working on things just to keep myself busy so that I didn't feel, because emotion is something that we don't like, and it's something that we don't like to talk about. And I feel like it's a one day at a time, but you have to see your vision, and you have to see what you want to accomplish out of it, and it is possible. And just one step at a time, put your nose down and take the baby steps that will end up getting you to your goal. And, you know, while my goal was partly designed by my wife, I will totally admit to that, but it was that we went through the steps and the channels to get there together. And it's built our relationship stronger, it's built our family stronger, and it's built our adoptive family stronger.
Thank you for sharing that. And that was actually something I had written down earlier, and because of the connection issues, I didn't want to find out if you were going to have to repeat yourself, but I fully recognize that there are deep emotions that are running in both sides, the prospective adoptive fathers, prospective adoptive moms, and that often I think the emotions that the mothers are going through are probably more obvious because, like you said, it may just be easier for that community of people touched by adoption to just bring it out. But that is not to ever say that there's not the emotions, the longings, the frustrations, the confusions, or the worries going on, and even the excitement going on in the adoptive dad's side. And so I'm so glad that you could speak on that.
It's absolutely a roller coaster. I mean, if nothing else, expect that, because there's going to be highs and there's going to be lows through the whole process. And the only thing you can do is make the best decisions that you can possibly make together.
And I think probably for me, my takeaway here would just be that it is unfortunate that sometimes, Kim, I know you and I both have spoken with families that are disjointed in their adoption decision, and that really is the best place to start, is to make sure that you have that root in your faith, that you can trust that you are walking down a path towards your future family, but then that you're partnered together, you know, investing in this future in adoption, and then, you know, taking it as it comes and doing the best that you can, and just putting yourselves out there and being ready. You offered us so much tonight, Jake. I'm so grateful. Kim, do you have anything you wanted to add, or any questions you know were on your mind when we began?
You know, it was a great tie-in, you know, Jake, how you said, you know, baby steps, one step at a time. You know, that tied in with what you were saying in the beginning with, you know, don't try and look a mile into the future. You know, focus on, you know, the next several feet in front of you, and just take baby steps, and you will get there. And I think that's, you know, sometimes families are on pause, and, you know, they haven't taken the action steps to, you know, get to make their vision a reality, you know, their dream of becoming parents or adding another child to their family, you know, a reality. And I think attending this webinar and being open to the things that were on Jake's heart tonight that he was sharing with all of us, that's a great step in the right direction. And, you know, if you're not sure what to do next, reach out to us here at Lifetime, and we'll talk it over with you, and we'll come up with a plan that you can follow. You know, and so we're here for you guys, and thank you, Jake. I appreciate all the stories that you shared. I mean, you can go. We should probably have like a 2-hour webinar for you. You are great. I appreciate the stories that you shared and the sentiments that you shared from an adoptive father's point of view.
Well, thank you very much.
I just want to thank everyone for attending tonight, and just ask that you would also look forward to Monday's webinar, because we get to hear from Marty, founder of Lifetime and adoptive mom, and I know that she is ready also to just speak more to the importance of open adoption, but also to comfort you and bring you encouragement in this time as you take those steps, and the diligence and the challenges that you overcome to get to your adoption. I hope that you'll all look for that email and sign up to hear Marty's webinar on Monday. But we've also been recording tonight's webinar, so if you want to hear it again, you can also go to adoptionteleconference.com. Probably early next week it'll be up. And I hope all of you have a great weekend. If you have any questions or feedback from tonight's call, please share it with us. We want to hear from you. You can email me directly. My name is Libby, L-I-B-B-Y, at lifetimeadoption.com. And I would love to know how tonight's webinar touched you, or if you have any questions, like Kim said, we are happy to connect with you, whatever phase of adoption planning you're in, just reach out and let us know if you have any questions that went unanswered tonight or anything that comes to mind after we disconnect. So thank you again, Jake. Thank you, Kim, for joining us, and I wish you all a very good night.
Have a great night, everyone. Bye-bye.